The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the mercantile store, and Willa Norton pressed her palm against the scarred side of her face, dreading the moment she would have to step down into the blazing Arizona sun and face whatever future awaited her in Gila City. The burn marks stretched from her left temple down to her jaw, a permanent reminder of the fire that had taken her family's farmhouse 3 years ago. She was 22 now, and the matchmaker back in Missouri had been brutally honest. No man wanted a bride with a ruined face and empty pockets. But Reverend Matthews had heard of a charitable organization that helped place women out west, women who otherwise had no prospects. The advertisement had been vague, mentioning only that men in the territories needed wives and were willing to overlook certain disadvantages. Willa gathered her single carpet bag and accepted the driver's hand as she stepped down onto the dusty street. It was September 1883, and Gila City sat in the harsh landscape of southeastern Arizona, a mining town that had seen better days but still clung to life through sheer stubbornness, and the cattle ranches that dotted the surrounding territory. "You the mail-order bride," a woman's voice called out. Willa turned to see a plump woman in her 50s approaching, wearing a faded calico dress and a bonnet that had been mended several times. Her face was kind, though her eyes held the weariness of someone who had seen too much of life's hardships. "I am Willa Norton, yes," she replied, keeping her scarred side angled away out of habit. "I am Martha Gallagher. My husband runs the general store. The gentleman who sent for you, he asked me to bring you to the boarding house first, let you get settled and cleaned up from the journey." Martha's eyes flickered briefly to Willa's face, then away, not with disgust but with careful politeness. "That's kind of him. Is he the gentleman, is he here?" Martha shifted her weight, looking uncomfortable. "Well, truth is, there was a bit of confusion with the arrangements. The man who originally sent for a bride, he passed on last month. Consumption. But there's another rancher, Clayton Burke, who said he would honor the agreement if you were willing. He runs a cattle operation about 5 miles out of town. Good man, honest, works hard. He is 26, never been married." Willa's heart sank. So she was unwanted even here, passed along like an obligation. "I see." "Now, do not go thinking it is charity," Martha said quickly, reading her expression. "Clay Burke is a proud man. He would not have agreed if he did not need a wife. Ranch life is hard, and a man needs a partner. He is not one for courting or making pretty speeches. When he heard there was a woman already on her way with nowhere else to go, he figured it made practical sense. Practical sense. Not romance, not desire, just practical sense." Willa supposed she should be grateful. At least she would have a roof over her head and food to eat. "When will I meet him?" "He will be in town tomorrow for supplies. You can meet him then, talk things over proper. If either of you decides it would not work, we will figure something else out." Martha started walking toward a 2-story building with a sign that read, "Mrs. Henderson's Boarding House." Willa followed, acutely aware of the stares from people on the street. A man in dusty chaps paused in his conversation to watch her pass. 2 women outside the milliner's shop whispered behind their hands. The boarding house was clean but sparse. Martha showed her to a small room on the 2nd floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that overlooked the street. "You rest up now. I will bring you some supper later. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about the rest." After Martha left, Willa sat on the bed and let the tears come. She had known this would be hard, but the reality felt overwhelming. She was hundreds of miles from everything familiar, about to meet a stranger who might take one look at her and change his mind, no matter what he had told Martha. She washed her face carefully, unpacked her few belongings, and lay down on the bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the town, horses passing by, men calling to each other, the tinny sound of a piano from one of the saloons. This was her life now, and she had to find a way to make the best of it. The next morning, Willa dressed in her best outfit, a simple gray dress that she had sewn herself. It was well made but plain, with no ornamentation. She could not afford frills, and besides, nothing could draw attention away from her face. She brushed her dark brown hair and pinned it up carefully, then forced herself to eat the breakfast that Mrs. Henderson brought to her room. At 10 o'clock, Martha arrived to walk her to the general store. Clay sent word he would be here around 11. "You are not too nervous, are you?" "Terrified," Willa admitted. Martha patted her arm. "He is a good man. I have known him since he came to Gila City 4 years ago. Started with nothing but a piece of land and a dozen head of cattle. Now he has got a proper ranch, over 200 head, and a house he built with his own hands. Works harder than any 3 men I have ever met." They reached the store, and Martha led her inside where it was cooler. Mr. Gallagher, a thin man with spectacles, nodded politely to Willa and went back to arranging cans on a shelf. Martha poured 2 cups of water from a pitcher and handed one to Willa. The minutes crawled by. Willa's hands trembled, so she clasped them together in her lap. She kept her scarred side turned toward the wall, though she knew it was pointless. He would see it soon enough. The door opened, and a man walked in, and Willa's breath caught. Clayton Burke was tall, probably over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who did hard physical labor every day. His hair was sandy brown, sun-bleached in places, and fell almost to his collar. He wore dusty work clothes, denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and scuffed boots. His face was tanned and weathered, with strong features and pale blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. A day's worth of stubble covered his jaw. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing hair that was flattened from the hat's pressure. His eyes found Martha first, then moved to Willa. She stood up slowly, forcing herself not to turn away. Let him see. Let him decide now and be done with it. Clayton walked toward her, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He stopped a few feet away, and his eyes met hers directly. She waited for the flicker of disappointment, the barely concealed disgust, the polite but firm rejection. Instead, he said, "You are Willa Norton?" "Yes." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I am Clayton Burke. Folks call me Clay." He turned his hat in his hands, and she realized he was nervous too. "Martha told you about the situation." "She did. I want to be straight with you. I need a wife. Ranch life is hard, and I cannot keep up with everything alone. I need someone who can cook, help with the animals when necessary, keep the house. In return, I will provide for you, give you a home, treat you with respect." He paused, his eyes still on hers. "I am not a rich man. I cannot offer you luxury, but I can offer you security and a decent life." "I understand," Willa said quietly. "I need to be honest with you as well. I have no dowry, no money at all. And as you can see, I am not. My face." "You are beautiful to me," Clayton said, and the simple honesty in his voice made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You do not have to say that," she whispered. "I do not say things I do not mean." He took a step closer. "I see a woman who had the courage to travel hundreds of miles to an unknown place to start a new life. I see someone with kind eyes and a strong spine. That is beautiful to me." Martha made a small sound, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "Clay Burke, I never knew you had such poetry in you." He flushed slightly but did not look away from Willa. "Will you marry me, Miss Norton? I know it is fast and you do not know me, but I give you my word I will be a good husband to you." Willa searched his face, looking for any sign of pity or deception. She found only earnest sincerity and a nervousness that matched her own. He meant what he said. This rough cowboy with calloused hands and sun-damaged skin genuinely saw something in her worth valuing. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." Clayton's face broke into a smile that transformed him, making him look younger and almost boyish. "Tomorrow, Reverend Cole can perform the ceremony." "Tomorrow," Willa agreed, her heart pounding. They were married the next afternoon in the small church at the edge of town. Willa wore the same gray dress, as it was the only decent one she owned. Martha and her husband stood as witnesses, along with Reverend Cole's wife. Clayton wore clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, and he spoke his vows in a clear, firm voice. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton kissed her cheek gently, carefully avoiding the scarred side, and Willa felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. They loaded her carpetbag into his wagon, and he helped her up onto the seat beside him. The ride to the ranch took about 40 minutes, following a dusty trail that wound through scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear cactus. The mountains rose in the distance, purple-blue against the bright sky. "It is not much to look at right now," Clayton said as they drove. "Too dry this time of year. But in spring, after the rains, it turns green and there are wildflowers everywhere. It is right pretty then." "How much land do you have?" "About 800 acres. Not all of it is good grazing, but there is a creek that runs through the property year-round, and that makes all the difference. I have got 230 head of cattle right now, hoping to expand next year if the market holds steady." He talked about the ranch as they traveled, and Willa listened, learning about his plans and dreams. He had come from Texas, he told her, after his parents died in a fever outbreak. He had worked as a ranch hand for several years, saving every penny until he had enough to buy his own land. "What about you?" he asked. "Martha said you came from Missouri, a small farm outside of Springfield. My father grew corn mostly, and my mother kept chickens and a vegetable garden." She paused, then decided to tell him the truth. "They died in a fire 3 years ago. I was the only one who made it out. That is how I got these." She gestured to her face. Clayton's hands tightened on the reins. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible. I tried to go back in for them, but the smoke was too thick. I got turned around and nearly did not make it out myself. A neighbor pulled me through a window." The memories still haunted her dreams sometimes. "After that, I lived with my aunt, but she had 6 children of her own and could barely feed them all. When I heard about the matchmaking service, it seemed like the best option." "I am glad you came," Clayton said quietly. "I know this is not how most women dream of getting married, but I will do my best to make you happy." The ranch house came into view, a sturdy structure of wood and adobe with a covered porch. It was small, maybe 3 rooms, but it looked well built and cared for. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings. A couple of horses grazed in a corral. Clayton helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag to the house. Inside, it was neat but obviously a bachelor's domain. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a wood stove, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a few shelves. A door led to what she assumed was the bedroom. "I know it needs a woman's touch," Clayton said, looking around as if seeing it through her eyes. "I am not much for decorating. But you can do whatever you like with it. Make it feel like home." "It is fine," Willa said honestly. It was better than she had expected, actually. Everything was clean and orderly, and the house was solid. She had worried she might find herself in a shack with a dirt floor. Clayton set her bag down and turned to her, suddenly awkward again. "I will sleep in the barn tonight, give you time to settle in and get comfortable." "Clay, we are married," Willa said, though her cheeks burned. "I will not turn you out of your own bed. I do not want to rush you into anything. I know this is all happening fast." She appreciated his consideration, but she also knew that putting off the inevitable would only make it more awkward. "I am your wife now. I understand what that means." They looked at each other for a long moment, and then Clayton stepped closer and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his grip was gentle. "I will never hurt you, Willa. I swear that to you. I believe you." That night, they lay together in the darkness, and Clayton was tender and patient with her. Afterward, he held her carefully, and Willa felt something she had not felt in a long time. Safe, protected, valued, the next few weeks fell into a routine. Clayton woke before dawn and went out to tend the cattle. Willa cleaned the house, cooked their meals, and gradually began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to gather eggs from the chickens Clayton kept, to milk the cow, to bake bread in the temperamental oven. Clayton came in for lunch each day, dusty and tired, but always with a smile for her. He told her about his morning, about the cattle he had found near the creek or the fence that needed mending. She told him about her experiments with cooking, learning what he liked and what made him make polite faces before pushing his food around his plate. "I am sorry," she said one day after a particularly unsuccessful attempt at making biscuits. They had come out hard as rocks. "I am not a very good cook." "You are learning," Clayton said diplomatically, sawing at his biscuit with determination. "These are, well, they are better than my attempts. I once made biscuits so hard I used them for target practice." Willa laughed, and she realized it was the first time she had truly laughed since before the fire. "You are being kind. I am being honest." He finally managed to break off a piece and chewed it thoughtfully. "Maybe a little more milk next time, or less flour, I do not know. I just know these could probably stop a bullet." She laughed again, and Clayton grinned at her, clearly pleased to have amused her. In the evenings, after supper, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. Clayton whittled, his hands busy with small projects, while Willa sewed or mended clothes. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories from their pasts. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. "You ever regret it?" Willa asked one evening. "Agreeing to marry me?" Clayton looked up from the piece of wood he was shaping. "No, never. Why would you think that?" I know I was not what you would have chosen if you had options. I know I am not pretty, and I came with nothing, and I cannot even make decent biscuits most of the time." He set down his knife and wood and turned to face her fully. "Willa, listen to me. You are exactly what I would have chosen. You work hard. You do not complain. You have got courage and kindness. And you are pretty. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you." "How can you say I am pretty when I look like this?" She touched her scarred cheek. Clayton reached out and gently took her hand, pulling it away from her face. Then, deliberately, he leaned forward and kissed the scarred skin, his lips warm and soft against the damaged tissue. "These scars tell me you are a survivor. They tell me you are strong. That is beautiful, Willa. You are beautiful." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and Clayton pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried. She had spent 3 years believing she was ruined, unmarriageable, worthy only of pity. But Clayton saw something different when he looked at her, and slowly she was beginning to believe him. As autumn deepened, the work on the ranch intensified. Clayton spent long days moving cattle to better grazing areas, fixing fences, and preparing for winter. Willa learned to help where she could, bringing him lunch in the fields, assisting with the horses, even helping to herd cattle when he was short-handed. One afternoon in late October, Clayton came back to the house earlier than usual, his face grim. "We have got trouble. Found signs of someone cutting through the fence on the north boundary. Lost about a dozen head." "Rustlers?" Willa asked, alarmed. "Maybe. Or could be they just wandered through a gap and someone took advantage. Either way, I need to ride out and check the rest of the boundaries. Make sure the herd is secure. I will probably be gone overnight. I will pack you some food." Willa prepared supplies while Clayton saddled his horse and loaded his rifle. Before he left, he came back into the house and took her by the shoulders. "Keep the door barred while I am gone. My rifle is over the fireplace if you need it. You know how to use it. My father taught me." "Good. I do not think you will have trouble, but I need to know you are safe." He kissed her, longer and more intensely than usual. "I will be back tomorrow by afternoon." After he rode out, the house felt empty and too quiet. Willa went about her chores, but she found herself constantly looking out the windows, watching the horizon. Night fell, and she barred the door as Clayton had instructed, then lay in their bed alone, missing the warmth of his body beside her. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke suddenly to the sound of horses outside. Multiple horses. Her heart pounding, Willa grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, peering out carefully. 4 men on horseback sat in the yard, and even in the moonlight she could see they looked rough. One of them called out, "Hello, the house. We are looking for Clayton Burke." Willa's hands tightened on the rifle. Something felt wrong. "He is not here," she called back. "You will have to come back another time." "When will he be back?" "I do not know. He did not say." The men conferred among themselves in low voices she could not make out. Then the spokesman called again. "We are friends of his from Texas. We have ridden a long way. Could you spare some water for our horses?" Willa hesitated. If they were truly friends of Clayton's, she did not want to be inhospitable, but her instincts screamed danger. "I will bring some out. You stay where you are." She filled 2 buckets from the water barrel and, keeping the rifle within reach, unbarred the door. The moment she stepped onto the porch, she knew she had made a mistake. The men dismounted and spread out, moving with a practiced coordination that spoke of bad intentions. The leader, a man with a thick black beard and cold eyes, smiled at her. "That is real kind of you, madam. Now, where did you say Burke was?" "I told you. I do not know." Willa backed toward the door, but another man had circled around behind her, blocking her path. "See, we have got business with Mr. Burke," the bearded man said, walking closer. "He has got something that belongs to us, cattle specifically, about a dozen head that wandered off our property." "Those cattle are branded with the Burke ranch mark," Willa said, her voice shaking but firm. "They belong to my husband." "Your husband? Well, is that not interesting?" He looked her over in a way that made her skin crawl. "Pretty little thing like you married to a cattle rustler." "My husband is not a thief. Those are his cattle and you know it. You are the ones who cut the fence and drove them off." The man's smile faded. "You have got a smart mouth, lady. Maybe we need to teach Burke a lesson about keeping better control of his property, both his cattle and his woman." Willa lunged for the rifle, but the man behind her grabbed her arms, pinning them to her sides. She screamed and fought, kicking and twisting, but he was too strong. The bearded man stepped closer, reaching for her face. A shot rang out, and the man holding her suddenly released her and stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Willa spun to see Clayton on horseback at the edge of the yard, his rifle raised. "Next one goes through your head instead of your shoulder," Clayton said, his voice deadly calm. "All of you mount up and ride out. Now." "Burke, we were just having a conversation with your wife," the bearded man said, but he was already backing toward his horse. "I heard enough of your conversation. You are on my land, threatening my wife. That gives me the right to shoot you all and let the buzzards have what is left. Is that what you want?" The wounded man was already on his horse, blood staining his shirt. The others mounted quickly. The bearded man pointed at Clayton. "This is not over, Burke." "Yes, it is. If I see any of you on my property again, I will not bother with warnings. Now get out." They rode off into the darkness and Clayton dismounted, running to Willa. Are you all right? Did they hurt you? No, you got here in time. How did you know I found the cattle? They had not wandered, they were driven and not far. I figured whoever took them would come back for more. When I saw the tracks heading toward the house, I rode hard. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. God, Willa, if something had happened to you, I am all right, she said, though she was shaking. You saved me. They went inside and Clayton checked all the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. He reloaded his rifle and set it by the door. Only then did he seem to relax, pulling Willa onto his lap as he sat in one of the kitchen chairs. I should not have left you alone, he said, his face buried in her hair. I should have taken you to town or had someone stay with you. You could not have known. This is wild country, Willa. There are men out here who do not respect the law or other people's property. I knew that, and I still left you unprotected. Stop, she said firmly, pulling back to look at him. You did what you had to do to protect our livelihood. I am not a child, Clay. I am your partner. This is my ranch too now, and that means sharing the risks as well as the rewards. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are right, but that does not mean I have to like putting you in danger. Then we will just have to be more careful, both of us. Over the next few days, Clayton rode to town and reported the incident to the sheriff, a weary man named Tom Garrett who promised to look into it but held out little hope of catching the rustlers. They move around too much, he explained. Hit a ranch, take a few head, sell them fast and move on. By the time we get organized, they are 3 counties away. Clayton also talked to his neighbors, warning them about the rustlers and organizing an informal watch system. If anyone saw suspicious activity, they would ride to alert the others. It was the best they could do without any real law enforcement to help them. Meanwhile, Willa was discovering she was stronger than she had realized. The incident with the rustlers had been terrifying, but she had not fallen apart. She had kept her head and tried to protect herself and Clayton's property. The knowledge gave her confidence. She also noticed that people in town had started treating her differently. When she went in for supplies with Clayton, Martha Gallagher made a point of introducing her to other women, and several of them invited her to a quilting circle that met weekly. At first, Willa hesitated, afraid of the stares and whispers that had followed her all her life. But Clayton encouraged her. These are good people, Willa. They will accept you, you will see. The quilting circle met in the church hall, and Willa arrived nervously, carrying a basket with her sewing supplies. 6 women were already there, ranging in age from early 20s to 60s. Martha waved her over. Ladies, this is Willa Burke, Clay's new wife. Willa, this is Elizabeth Shaw, Catherine Ryan, Mary Thornton, Susan Miller, and Patricia Cole, the Reverend's wife. The women greeted her warmly, and Willa relaxed a little. They made space for her at the quilting frame, and soon she was stitching alongside them, listening to their chatter about children and husbands and the upcoming harvest festival. How are you settling in at the ranch? Elizabeth Shaw asked. She was a pretty blonde woman about Willa's age, married to a farmer. Well, I think. There is a lot to learn, but Clay is patient with me. Clay Burke is a good man, Patricia Cole said. She was the oldest of the group with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes. My husband speaks highly of him. Says he is one of the most honest men he knows. I am fortunate, Willa said quietly. He is fortunate too, Martha said firmly. I have seen the change in him since you arrived. He smiles more, seems lighter somehow, if that makes sense. Did she do that for him? Willa wondered. The thought pleased her more than she wanted to admit. As the afternoon wore on, Willa found herself genuinely enjoying the company. These women did not stare at her scars or treat her like an object of pity. They simply accepted her as one of them. Another ranch wife dealing with the same struggles and joys they all faced. When Clayton picked her up later, Willa was animated in a way he had not seen before, telling him about the women she had met and the plans for the Harvest Festival in November. "You had a good time," he observed, smiling. "I did. Martha invited us to supper next week. I said we would go if that is all right." "Of course it is. I am glad you are making friends, Willa. You need people besides just me." November arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of rain. The Harvest Festival was held on the first Saturday of the month, and it seemed like everyone from miles around came to town for it. There were tables laden with food, games for the children, horse races, and dancing in the evening. Willa wore her best dress, the gray one she had been married in, and helped set up the food tables. Clayton entered one of the horse races and came in second, winning a small prize of $5, which he promptly spent on a length of pretty blue fabric for Willa. "You did not have to do that," she protested, though she loved the soft cotton printed with tiny flowers. "I wanted to. You need a new dress. You have been wearing the same two since you got here." "Because they are the only two I have." "Exactly. Now you can make another one." As the sun set, musicians set up on a makeshift stage, a fiddle player, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica, and people began to dance. Clayton took Willa's hand. "Will you dance with me?" "I do not know if I remember how. It has been a long time." "Then we will figure it out together." He led her into the group of dancers, and they moved together somewhat awkwardly at first, but then they found their rhythm. Willa was aware of people watching them, but for once, it did not bother her. Let them watch. She was dancing with her husband, and he was looking at her like she was the most beautiful woman there. "Happy?" Clayton asked, his mouth close to her ear so she could hear him over the music. "Very," she admitted. He pulled her a little closer, and they danced until the musicians took a break. Then they found a quiet spot away from the crowds and sat together, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I never thought I would have this," Willa said softly. "A home, a husband, a place where I belong." "Neither did I," Clayton admitted. "I thought I would just work the ranch alone until I was too old to manage it, then sell out and, I do not know, die somewhere unremarkable. Having you here, it has given me something to work for besides just surviving. It has given me a future I want to see." Willa leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of music and laughter drifting over to them on the cool night air. Winter came gently that year to southern Arizona. The temperatures dropped, but snow was rare at their elevation. Clayton worked on maintenance projects around the ranch, fixing things that had been neglected during the busy summer months. Willa improved her cooking, with advice from the women in her quilting circle, and started making curtains from the blue fabric Clayton had bought her. In late December, Willa realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, afraid to hope, then finally told Clayton. "Are you sure?" he asked, his eyes wide. "Fairly sure. It has been 6 weeks now." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby, maybe," Willa cautioned, though she was smiling. "It is early yet. A lot can happen." But as winter turned to spring, her belly began to swell, and the reality became undeniable. Clayton became absurdly protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard. The women in town rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Martha Gallagher organized a baby shower in April, and Willa found herself surrounded by women who had become genuine friends. They gave her carefully crafted gifts, tiny gowns, soft blankets, hand-carved rattles from their husbands. Willa was overwhelmed by their generosity. "We take care of our own," Patricia Cole said, patting Willa's hand. "You are part of this community now." In late May, when the wildflowers were blooming across the ranch just as Clayton had promised they would, Willa's labor began. Clayton rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house but also attended most of the births in the area. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Clayton paced outside, sick with worry, until finally he heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Burke, a healthy boy with good lungs." Clayton rushed inside to find Willa pale and exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Clay, meet your son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the impossibly small face, the tiny fingers that curled reflexively. "He is perfect," he whispered. "We need to name him," Willa said. "What do you think about calling him Matthew after the Reverend who helped me come west?" "Matthew Burke," Clayton tested. "I like it. Matthew Clayton Burke." The baby, as if recognizing his new name, opened his eyes and looked directly at his father. Clayton felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. This tiny person was his son, his family, his legacy, and Willa had given him this incredible gift. "Thank you," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for him, for everything." The weeks after Matthew's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby woke every few hours to nurse, and Willa walked around in a fog of sleeplessness. But Clayton helped as much as he could, changing diapers, walking with the baby when he fussed, taking over household chores so Willa could rest. In early July, on a hot afternoon when Matthew was about 6 weeks old, Willa was sitting in the rocking chair Clayton had made for her, nursing the baby, when she heard horses approaching. She tensed, remembering the rustlers, but then recognized one of their neighbors, Tom Shaw, Elizabeth's husband. Clayton came out of the barn and greeted Tom, and the two men talked for several minutes. Then Tom rode off and Clayton came inside, his face troubled. "What is wrong?" Willa asked. "There has been trouble at the Miller place. Rustlers again, but this time they burned the barn and threatened Susan Miller when she tried to stop them. Dan Miller is organizing the ranchers to go after them." "You are going." Willa's voice was calm, but inside she was afraid. "I have to. If we do not stop them, they will just keep coming back, hitting us one by one. We have to make a stand." Willa knew he was right, but the thought of him riding into danger made her chest tighten with fear. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. We will track them, find their camp, and either run them out of the territory or turn them over to the sheriff." He knelt beside her chair. "I do not want to leave you and Matthew, but I have to protect what is ours. You understand that, do not you?" "I do. Just promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will come back." "I promise," he said, and kissed her gently. The next morning, Clayton rode out with 7 other ranchers, all armed and determined. Willa watched him go with Matthew in her arms, trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. The next 3 days were agony. She went through the motions of caring for Matthew, feeding the animals, cooking meals she had no appetite for. She slept fitfully, waking at every sound, hoping to hear Clayton's horse. On the afternoon of the 4th day, she saw riders approaching. She grabbed the rifle and waited on the porch, then nearly collapsed with relief when she recognized Clayton in the lead. He was dusty and tired, but he was whole and unhurt. He dismounted and pulled her into his arms, careful not to squash the baby between them. "It is over." We caught up with them camped about 20 miles east. There was some shooting, but nobody on our side was hurt. 2 of the rustlers were wounded and the rest surrendered. The sheriff took them into custody. They will stand trial in Tucson. "Thank God," Willa breathed. "I was so worried." "I know. I am sorry I put you through that, but it is done now. They will not be bothering us again." That night, after Matthew was asleep in his cradle, Clayton and Willa lay in bed together, and he held her close. "I realized something while I was out there," he said quietly. "I used to think I was working the ranch for myself, to prove I could make something of my life. But now, everything I do is for you and Matthew. You two are my reason for everything." "We love you too," Willa said, turning to face him. "You have given me a life I never dreamed I could have. You saw value in me when no one else did. You made me believe in myself again." He cupped her scarred cheek in his palm, running his thumb gently over the damaged skin. "You always had value, Willa. You just needed someone to remind you." They made love tenderly, reaffirming their connection, their commitment to each other and the family they were building together. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, and Clayton was able to expand his herd and add more acreage. Matthew grew into a lively, curious toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Willa's sewing skills improved to the point where she started taking and mending work from people in town, earning a little extra money that she saved carefully. In the fall of 1886, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In April of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, a tiny, delicate baby with wispy blonde hair and her father's smile. Clayton was utterly smitten with his daughter, carrying her everywhere, singing to her in his off-key voice, making her laugh with silly faces. Matthew, now almost 3, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, though his help was sometimes more hindrance than assistance. The ranch continued to grow. Clayton hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increasing workload, young men who slept in the bunkhouse he had built behind the barn. Willa's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and extras to sell in town. She also started keeping bees, harvesting honey that became popular with her quilting circle friends. In 1889, when Matthew was 4 and Caroline was 2, Willa realized she was pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was tired all the time and frequently nauseous. When her labor began in December, it was long and difficult. Mrs. Henderson looked worried more than once, and Clayton hovered anxiously. But finally, after 14 hours of labor, Willa delivered another son, smaller than Matthew had been but healthy. They named him James, and Clayton cradled him with the same awe and wonder he had shown with his other children. 3, he said, shaking his head in amazement. "We have 3 children, Willa. Is that enough for you?" she asked, exhausted but smiling. "More than enough. You have given me everything, more than I ever hoped for." Life settled into a new rhythm with 3 young children. The days were chaotic and exhausting, filled with the constant demands of feeding, changing, and entertaining small humans. But they were also filled with laughter and joy. Matthew learned to ride a pony Clayton bought for him. Caroline followed her older brother everywhere, trying to keep up with his adventures. James grew from a tiny infant into a plump, happy baby who smiled at everyone. In the spring of 1891, Clayton made a trip to Tucson to sell cattle and came back with a surprise. He had bought a piano, a used upright that had seen better days but still worked. "What on earth?" Willa said, staring at the instrument as the delivery men hauled it into the house, barely fitting it through the door. "I remembered you said your mother used to play, and she taught you a little. I thought maybe you could teach the children, and I just wanted you to have something beautiful, something just for you." Willa was speechless. The piano must have cost a significant amount of money they could have used for practical things. But Clayton had spent it on this gift for her, this thoughtful, extravagant gesture. She sat down at the keys and picked out a simple melody, rusty from years of not playing. Caroline climbed onto her lap, fascinated, and pressed her small fingers on the keys, creating discordant notes. Matthew stood beside them, watching intently. "It is wonderful," Willa said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Clay." Over the years, the piano became a central part of their family life. Willa relearned the songs her mother had taught her and found music books to learn new ones. She taught Matthew and Caroline to play, and eventually James when he was old enough. In the evenings, after supper and chores were done, the family gathered around the piano while Willa played and everyone sang together. Those were the moments Willa treasured most. Her husband standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders. Her children clustered around, their voices raised in song. This was the family she had created, the home she had built from nothing, and it was more precious to her than anything else in the world. In 1894, when Matthew was 9, Caroline was 7, and James was 5, tragedy struck the community. A disease swept through Gila City, something the doctor called typhoid fever. It hit children especially hard, and several families lost sons and daughters. Willa was terrified, keeping her children close and away from town as much as possible. But despite her precautions, Caroline fell ill. She developed a high fever and became delirious, calling out for her mother in the night. The doctor came and did what he could, but medical knowledge was limited. All they could do was try to keep the fever down and keep Caroline hydrated. Willa sat by her daughter's bedside for 3 days and nights, barely sleeping, praying desperately for her child to recover. Clayton took over caring for the boys and running the household, his face drawn with worry. On the 4th day, Caroline's fever finally broke. She opened her eyes, weak but lucid, and asked for water. Willa sobbed with relief, holding her daughter gently. "You are going to be all right, sweetheart. You are going to be fine." Caroline recovered slowly, regaining her strength over the next few weeks. The experience left both parents shaken, suddenly aware of how fragile life was, how quickly they could lose everything that mattered. "I do not know what I would do if we lost one of them," Clayton said one night after they had checked on all 3 sleeping children for the 4th time. "Do not think about it," Willa said, though she had been having the same thoughts. "They are all safe. That is what matters." The scare made them appreciate their blessings even more. They had a thriving ranch, 3 healthy children, and each other. Many families were not so fortunate. As the years passed, the children grew. Matthew became his father's right-hand man on the ranch, learning to rope cattle and mend fences, showing a natural aptitude for ranch work. Caroline was quieter, preferring to help her mother in the house and garden, and showing real talent on the piano. James was the adventurous one, always climbing things he should not, exploring places he had been told to avoid, giving his parents gray hairs with his escapades. In 1899, when Matthew was 14, he asked if he could start working for wages like the ranch hands. Clayton agreed, paying him fairly for his work, and Matthew saved every penny, dreaming of one day having his own ranch. Caroline, at 12, had grown into a lovely young woman who looked remarkably like her mother but without the scars. She was kind and gentle, popular with everyone who knew her. Boys were starting to notice her, which made Clayton grumpy and overprotective. James, at 10, was pure energy and mischief, but also deeply loving. He adored his mother and would bring her wildflowers he found on his explorations, or interesting rocks, or once, a very startled lizard that he was convinced she would want to see. That fall, Willa turned 38. She looked at herself in the mirror one morning, seeing the lines that had appeared at the corners of her eyes, the threads of gray in her dark hair, the scars that were still prominent but somehow seemed less important now. She thought about the frightened, desperate woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 16 years ago, believing she had nothing to offer and no future worth imagining. That woman would be astonished to see what her life had become. Clayton came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we have come. About how different my life is from what I expected. Better or worse, so much better. Better than I ever dreamed possible." He turned her to face him, his blue eyes, now with their own lines and creases, looking at her with the same warmth they had held on the day they met. "You know what I see when I look at you?" "What?" "I see the strongest woman I have ever known. I see the best decision I ever made. I see my whole world." "You are going to make me cry," she said, but she was smiling. "I see a woman who took a chance on a rough cowboy who barely knew how to string two pretty words together. A woman who built a home and raised 3 amazing children. A woman who is, and always has been, beautiful to me." Willa kissed him, pouring 16 years of love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, she said, "I love you, Clayton Burke. I have loved you since the day you looked at my scarred face and said I was beautiful." "That was the easiest truth I ever spoke," he replied. In 1902, Matthew announced that he had been offered a job as foreman on a ranch near Tucson. It was an excellent opportunity for a young man of 18, a chance to gain experience and save money toward his own place. Clayton and Willa were proud, even as they dreaded seeing him leave. The night before Matthew left, the family gathered around the piano one last time, singing together as they had done for so many years. Willa played all of Matthew's favorite songs, and Clayton's voice was rough with emotion as he sang. The next morning they saw Matthew off, Clayton shaking his son's hand and pulling him into a tight embrace. "You make us proud, son. Remember everything I taught you, and do not be afraid to try new things. And write your mother, or she will worry herself sick." "I will, Pa, I promise." Willa hugged her oldest child, this young man who had made her a mother, who had been the first of her blessings. "You will do wonderful things, Matthew, I know it." After he rode off, Willa cried, even though she knew it was natural for children to grow up and leave. Clayton held her, and they stood together watching the dust settle where their son had disappeared down the road. Life continued. Caroline, at 15, was courted by a young man named David Winston, the son of a neighboring rancher. He was polite and respectful, and Clayton grudgingly admitted he seemed decent, though no man would ever be good enough for his daughter in his opinion. James, at 13, was starting to show signs of the man he would become, shooting up in height and developing his father's broad shoulders. He worked hard on the ranch and was talking about maybe becoming a veterinarian, fascinated by the animals and how to keep them healthy. In 1904, Caroline married David Winston in a ceremony at the church, wearing a beautiful dress that Willa had spent months sewing. It was lace and silk, the finest materials they could afford, and Caroline looked radiant. Clayton cried during the ceremony, though he tried to hide it, and even Willa's eyes were wet as she watched her daughter pledge her life to the young man she loved. David was a good husband, and the young couple built a house on his family's ranch, only a few miles from the Burke place. Caroline visited often, and when she announced she was expecting her first child in 1905, Willa was overjoyed at the thought of becoming a grandmother. Matthew came home for his sister's wedding and brought with him a young woman named Sarah, a teacher he had met in Tucson. She was pretty and intelligent, with a warm smile and a love of books. She fit into the family easily, charming everyone with her kindness and her genuine interest in ranch life, despite being a city girl. Matthew announced their engagement at the wedding reception, and there was more celebrating, more tears, more joy. Clayton pulled his son aside later and said, "She is a good woman, Matthew. Treat her well." "I will, Pa. I learned from the best." Matthew and Sarah married in the fall of 1905, and Sarah moved to the ranch near Tucson. She wrote long letters to Willa, describing her adventures learning to be a ranch wife, asking for advice about everything from cooking to dealing with chickens. Willa wrote back faithfully, pleased to have gained a daughter as well as having given one away. In early 1906, Caroline gave birth to a daughter, making Clayton and Willa grandparents for the first time. They rode to the Winston Ranch as soon as they heard and met little Grace, a tiny bundle with dark hair and her mother's features. Clayton held his granddaughter with a tenderness that made Willa fall in love with him all over again. "Would you look at that?" he murmured. "A grandpa. Never thought I would live to see this day." "You are not that old," Willa teased, though she felt the same sense of wonder. They were grandparents. Their family was growing in ways they had never anticipated. A few months later, Sarah gave birth to a son, Matthew and Sarah's first child, named Clayton after his grandfather. When Matthew brought his wife and son home to visit, Clayton held his namesake and looked at Willa with eyes full of emotion. "2 grandchildren," he said. "We are blessed, Willa. We are so blessed." James, at 17, had decided against becoming a veterinarian and instead announced he wanted to join the Army. It was 1907, and he was restless, wanting to see more of the world than just southern Arizona. Clayton was not thrilled with the idea, but he understood his son's need to find his own path. "If this is what you want, we will support you," he told James. "But you be careful. The world is not always kind, and I need you to come home safe." "I will, Pa. I just need to do this. I need to know I can make it on my own." James enlisted and was sent for training, then stationed in California. His letters home were full of his experiences, the places he was seeing, the people he was meeting. Willa worried constantly, but she was also proud of his courage and independence. In 1909, at the age of 48, Willa realized she was pregnant again. It was a complete surprise, as she had assumed she was past the age of childbearing. The pregnancy was difficult, her body not as resilient as it had been in her 20s and 30s. The doctor advised caution, and Clayton hovered even more anxiously than he had with their previous children. "At our age, having a baby," Willa said, shaking her head. "What will people think?" "Who cares what people think?" Clayton replied. "We have never lived our lives worrying about that. If this baby is coming, then we will welcome it same as we did the others." In May of 1910, at the age of 49, Willa gave birth to another daughter, their 4th child and 2nd daughter. They named her Ellen, and she was small but healthy, with Clayton's blue eyes and a fuzz of blonde hair. Their grown children were astonished and delighted. Caroline, who now had 2 children of her own, came to help with the baby. Matthew and Sarah, who had 2 sons, sent gifts and congratulations. James got leave and came home to meet his baby sister, laughing at the absurdity of being a soldier with a newborn sibling. "Ma, Pa, you two are something else," he said, shaking his head but smiling. "Most people your age are thinking about rocking chairs and taking it easy. You are starting over with a baby." "We were never most people," Clayton said, cradling Ellen in his large, work-roughened hands. Ellen's arrival brought new energy to the ranch. Willa, despite her age, found she still had the stamina to care for an infant, though she was more tired than she had been with her other children. Clayton helped even more than before, getting up for night feedings, changing diapers, rocking the baby when she fussed. "You are a better father now than you were even before," Willa observed one night, watching him walk around the room with Ellen, singing softly to her. "I am more relaxed now," he said. "With the others, I was so afraid of doing something wrong. Now I know that love is the most important thing. The rest you figure out as you go." As Ellen grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Clayton, now in his 50s, had slowed down a bit, but was still active in running the operation. He had good ranch hands he trusted, including one young man named Pete who showed real promise and might one day take over managing the day-to-day operations. Matthew had bought his own ranch and was successfully running it with Sarah. They had 4 children now, 3 boys and a girl. Caroline and David had 4 children as well, 2 boys and 2 girls, and Caroline was active in the church and in organizing community events in Gila City. James had been promoted to sergeant and was considering making the Army his career. In 1915, Willa turned 54 and Clayton was 58. They had been married for 32 years, and Ellen was now 5 years old, a lively, curious child who kept them young. One evening, they sat on the porch as they had done for decades, watching the sunset. Ellen was asleep inside, worn out from a day of playing. The ranch was quiet except for the usual sounds of animals and wind. "You remember that first day we met?" Willa asked. "In Martha's store." "I remember everything about that day," Clayton said. "I remember how scared you looked and how you tried to hide your face. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, coming all that way to marry a stranger. I remember you saying I was beautiful. I thought you were either lying or crazy. I was telling the truth. And I would say the same thing today. You are still beautiful to me, Willa. More so now than then, because now I know everything you are. I know your strength and your kindness and your courage. I know how you love our children and grandchildren. I know how hard you have worked to build this life with me. That is true beauty." Willa reached for his hand, and their fingers interlaced, fitting together perfectly after so many years. "I never imagined this life. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was so afraid. I thought I was going to a life of duty and obligation, that I would be tolerated at best. But you gave me love. You gave me a family. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Clayton corrected. "I was just a cowboy with a piece of land and big dreams. You made those dreams real. You made this house a home. You gave me children and grandchildren. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning grateful for what I have." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the stars emerge. 3 decades of marriage, of hard work and joy and sorrow and triumph. 4 children raised to adulthood and one still young. Grandchildren who called them grandma and grandpa and climbed on their laps and begged for stories. "We did well, did we not?" Willa said softly. "We did better than well," Clayton replied. "We built something real, something lasting. Our children and grandchildren, they will remember us. They will tell their children about the woman who came to Arizona with no dowry and a scarred face, and the cowboy who saw past all that to the person she really was. They will tell them about the ranch we built and the love we shared. That is a legacy worth leaving." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder and Clayton wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Inside the house, they could hear Ellen stirring, probably waking from a dream. Soon one of them would go in and comfort her, sing her back to sleep, tuck her in with the quilted blanket Martha Gallagher had made all those years ago as a wedding gift. But for now, they sat together in the gathering darkness. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life out of courage and hard work and unwavering love. The scars on Willa's face had faded over the years, weathered by sun and time, but they were still visible. And Clayton still traced them sometimes with gentle fingers, still told her she was beautiful, still looked at her with the same warmth and affection he had shown on their wedding day. "I love you," Willa said, the words as easy and natural as breathing after all these years. "I love you too," Clayton replied. "Always have, always will." Inside, Ellen called out, "Mama, Papa." They stood up together, Clayton's hand at the small of Willa's back, a gesture of support and affection so automatic neither of them thought about it anymore. They went inside to their daughter, to their home, to the life they had created together against a backdrop of wild Arizona desert and endless sky. The years continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm that came from lives well lived and deeply rooted. Ellen grew from a curious 5-year-old into a thoughtful young woman. She inherited her mother's love of music and spent hours at the piano, her talents surpassing even Willa's. By the time she was 12, she was giving piano lessons to children in town, earning her own money and showing the same independent spirit that had brought her mother across the country all those years ago. Matthew and Sarah's ranch prospered, and their children began having children of their own, making Clayton and Willa great-grandparents. The first time Matthew brought his oldest son and that son's new baby to visit, Clayton held the infant and shook his head in wonder. "4 generations," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Never thought I would live to see 4 generations of Burkes." Willa stood beside him, peering at the tiny face of their great-granddaughter. "We have been blessed, Clay, more than we ever deserved." "We worked for these blessings," he corrected gently. "We earned them with every day we chose to love each other and build something good." Caroline's children were also growing up and starting families. Her oldest daughter married a banker from Tucson and moved to the city, which worried Caroline endlessly, though she was proud of her daughter's ambition and independence. Her sons worked various trades, one becoming a blacksmith, another a carpenter. They all stayed relatively close to Gila City, creating a network of family that stretched across southern Arizona. James, after 15 years in the Army, retired with honors and returned to Arizona in 1922. He was 32 years old, a decorated veteran who had seen parts of the world his parents could barely imagine. He came home quieter than he had left, with shadows in his eyes that spoke of things he never talked about. But he was still their son, still the boy who had brought his mother wildflowers and climbed every tree he could find. He settled on a small piece of land Clayton had set aside for him, building a modest house and starting a horse training business. He had a gift with animals, a patience and understanding that made even the most skittish horse trust him. People came from miles around to have James Burke work with their horses. One day, a young widow named Helen Taylor brought her late husband's stallion to James, asking if he could gentle the animal that had been wild with grief since its owner's death. Helen was 29, with kind eyes and a sad smile, and James found himself drawn to her quiet strength. Over the weeks he worked with her horse, James and Helen spent time talking, sharing stories of loss and survival. She had lost her husband to influenza 2 years earlier and had been raising their daughter alone. James told her about the war, about the things he had seen that still haunted him sometimes. They understood each other in a way that needed no explanation. By the end of that summer, James and Helen were courting, and by fall, they were engaged. Willa cried happy tears when James brought Helen to meet his parents officially, seeing the light back in her son's eyes that had been missing since he returned from the Army. They married in early 1923, and Helen's daughter, a sweet 7-year-old named Ruth, called James Papa within a month. Later that year, Helen gave birth to a son, and James finally had the family he had not known he was searching for. "All my children are settled now," Willa said to Clayton one evening. It was 1923, and she was 62 years old, her hair now more gray than brown, her body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But her spirit was strong, and her love for Clayton had only deepened with time. Matthew with his ranch, Caroline with her family, James with Helen and the children. And Ellen is doing so well with her music. We did it, Clay. We raised them right. You raised them right, Clayton said. He was 66 now, his hair completely white, his face deeply lined from years in the sun. But his blue eyes were still bright, still focused on Willa with the same devotion they had always held. I just tried to keep up with you. Ellen, now 13, came out onto the porch where they sat. Mama, Mrs. Henderson wants to know if I can play piano at the church social next month. She says I am the best pianist in town. Of course you can, sweetheart, Willa said, pride warming her chest. That is a great honor. After Ellen went back inside, Clayton reached for Willa's hand. She is going to do something special with her music, that one. Maybe even go to a music school someday. She wants to, Willa admitted. She has been talking about a conservatory in California, but I do not know if we can afford it. We will find a way, Clayton said firmly. We did not raise our children to dream small. If Ellen wants to study music, then by God, we will make it happen. And they did. Over the next few years, Clayton and Willa saved every extra penny they could. Matthew, Caroline, and James all contributed what they could afford. When Ellen turned 17 in 1927, she had enough money to attend the San Francisco Conservatory of Music for a year, with the understanding that she would need to work and earn scholarships to continue. The day they put Ellen on the train to California, Willa wept openly. Clayton held her as they watched the train disappear into the distance, carrying their youngest child away to her future. It is just us now, Willa said, leaning against her husband. The house will be so quiet. Then maybe we can finally hear ourselves think, Clayton said, but his voice was gentle, understanding her sadness. She will come home to visit, and we will go see her. This is not goodbye, Willa. It is just the next chapter. The house was indeed quiet without Ellen's music filling it. But Clayton and Willa adjusted, finding a new rhythm in their days. They were in their late 60s now, and while they were still active, they had to acknowledge their limitations. Clayton hired more help on the ranch, gradually transitioning more responsibilities to Pete, who had been with them for almost 20 years and knew the operation as well as Clayton did. Willa spent more time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on her skills in sewing and cooking, telling them stories of the old days when their grandfather had been a young cowboy, and she had been a frightened bride stepping off a stagecoach. Ellen thrived in San Francisco. Her letters home were full of excitement about her studies, the teachers she was learning from, the concerts she attended. She won scholarships that paid for her continued education, and by 1930, she had graduated and was teaching piano herself, building a reputation as an excellent instructor. In 1931, Ellen wrote to say she was engaged to a fellow musician, a violinist named Thomas Wright. They planned to marry in San Francisco, and they hoped the family could come for the wedding. It was a big trip for Clayton and Willa, now 74 and 68 respectively. But there was no question they would go. Their youngest child was getting married, and they would not miss it for anything. Matthew, Caroline, and James all made the journey as well, bringing spouses and children. It was a grand family reunion in San Francisco, with Burke's filling up an entire hotel. Ellen's wedding was beautiful, held in a lovely church with Thomas's quartet providing the music. Ellen played a piano piece she had composed herself, dedicating it to her parents and the love they had shown her throughout her life. At the reception, Clayton and Willa danced together, moving slowly but gracefully, a lifetime of partnership evident in how perfectly they moved together. Their children and grandchildren watched, several of them tearing up at the sight of these two people who had loved each other for nearly 50 years, still devoted, still together. "Look at them," Caroline whispered to Matthew. "After all these years, they still look at each other like newlyweds." "That is real love," Matthew replied. "That is what we should all aspire to." The trip to San Francisco exhausted both Clayton and Willa more than they wanted to admit. The journey home seemed longer than the one going. Back at the ranch, they both needed several days to recover. "We are getting old," Willa said one evening, settling into her rocking chair with a groan. "Speak for yourself," Clayton joked, but he eased himself into his own chair carefully, his joints protesting. "All right, maybe we are both getting old. Do you have any regrets?" Willa asked suddenly. "About how we have spent our lives?" Clayton looked at her, startled. "Regrets? Willa, I have lived a life beyond anything I could have imagined. I have had nearly 50 years with you. We have raised 4 incredible children. We have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We built a successful ranch from nothing. Why on earth would I have regrets? I just wonder sometimes if you ever wished you had married someone prettier, someone who came with money or connections or something useful." Even after all these years, the old insecurities still surfaced occasionally. Clayton set down the piece of wood he had been whittling and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Willa Burke, you listen to me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You were beautiful the day I met you, and you are beautiful now. You brought me everything that matters. Love, family, a home filled with laughter and music. I would not change a single thing about our life together. Not one thing. Do you understand me?" Tears slipped down Willa's weathered cheeks and she nodded. "I love you so much, Clayton Burke." "I love you too. Always have, always will." In 1933, Clayton fell ill with pneumonia. It was winter and the cold had settled deep into his lungs. The doctor came and did what he could, but at 76 years old, Clayton's body struggled to fight off the infection. Willa nursed him devotedly, barely sleeping, sitting by his bedside and holding his hand. The children all came, gathering at the ranch, waiting and praying. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house. The family Clayton and Willa had created, all of them there because of the choice these two people had made to love each other 50 years ago. For a week, Clayton hovered between life and death. But slowly, with Willa's constant care and his own stubborn will to live, he began to improve. By February, he was out of bed and walking around, though he tired easily and had lost considerable weight. "You are not allowed to leave me yet," Willa told him firmly. "We have got more years together, Clayton Burke. Do you hear me?" "Yes, madam," he said, smiling weakly. "I am not ready to leave you either." He recovered slowly but fully, and by spring he was back to his normal routines, though at a more measured pace. The scare had reminded them both that their time together, while already blessed with longevity, was finite. They made the most of their remaining years. They sat on the porch every evening, watching sunsets they had witnessed thousands of times but never tired of. They visited their children and grandchildren regularly. They attended church services and community events. They lived each day grateful for the gift of more time together. In 1936, Clayton and Willa celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The family threw a huge party at the ranch, with what seemed like half the county in attendance. There was food and music and dancing. Ellen came from California with Thomas and their 2 young children. Matthew brought his ever-growing family. Caroline and David were there with their children and grandchildren. James and Helen came with their blended family. As the sun set on that September evening, Clayton stood up and called for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, turning to face him. "I am not much for speeches," he began, his voice still strong despite his 79 years. "But I want to say a few words about this woman here." He gestured to Willa, who sat beside him looking embarrassed by the attention. 50 years ago, Willa Norton stepped off a stagecoach in Gila City. She had no money, no family, no prospects. She had a scarred face and a lot of courage. I took one look at her and knew she was the one for me. He paused, looking down at Willa with infinite tenderness. She gave me everything, 4 wonderful children, a house full of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a home filled with love and laughter. She worked beside me for 50 years, never complaining, always giving more than she took. She is the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. And I am the luckiest man alive because she said yes when I asked her to marry me. The crowd applauded, and Willa stood up, tears streaming down her face. Clayton pulled her into his arms, and they kissed, this elderly couple who had loved each other for half a century, and the applause grew louder. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Clayton and Willa sat together on the porch swing he had built years ago. Their children and grandchildren had cleaned up and gone home or to bed. It was just the two of them under the stars. 50 years, Willa said softly. It seems impossible. It seems like just yesterday I was stepping off that stagecoach, so scared I could barely breathe. You were the bravest thing I had ever seen, Clayton said. Still are. I was terrified. I thought you would take one look at me and send me back. I took one look at you and knew I had found my home. Not this ranch, not this land. You were my home, Willa, you still are. They rocked gently in the swing, the desert night cool and peaceful around them. Inside the house, they could hear one of the great-grandchildren crying, quickly soothed by a parent's voice. The sounds of family, of life, of the legacy they had built together. You think we will get more years? Willa asked. Or is this where our story ends? Our story will never end, Clayton said confidently. Not as long as there are people who remember us, who tell our story. And even after they are gone, our love will echo through the generations. Every time one of our descendants chooses love over fear, chooses courage over safety, chooses to see beauty where others see only flaws, that is us. That is our story continuing. Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space that had been hers for 50 years. Then our story will live forever. They sat together in the peaceful darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of meaning and love, who had created a family that would carry forward their values and their story. The ranch that Clayton had started with nothing was now a thriving operation that would pass to future generations. The children they had raised had become good people who raised good children of their own. From a beginning marked by scars and empty pockets and fear, they had created something beautiful and lasting. And at the center of it all was the simple truth that Clayton had spoken on their first meeting and lived every day since then. You are beautiful to me, Willa, he whispered into the darkness. And you are my whole world, Clay, she whispered back. The years that followed their 50th anniversary were peaceful ones. Clayton and Willa knew they were in the final chapter of their lives, and they approached each day with gratitude and intention. They did not take anything for granted, not the sunrise that painted the desert sky in brilliant colors, not the visits from grandchildren who climbed into their laps with sticky hands and endless questions, not the simple pleasure of sitting together in comfortable silence after a lifetime of conversation. In 1939, Clayton passed away quietly in his sleep, 3 months after his 82nd birthday. Willa woke in the morning to find him still and peaceful beside her, gone from this world but with a slight smile on his weathered face, as if he had died dreaming of something wonderful. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Clayton Burke had been a respected member of the community for over 50 years, known for his honesty, his hard work, and his devotion to his family. But the greatest testament to his life was in the faces of his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of whom carried something of him forward into the world. After Clayton's death, Willa lived with Matthew and Sarah for a while, then with Caroline and David, rotating among her children so as not to burden any one family for too long. But she missed the ranch, missed the house where she had lived for over half a century, missed the porch where she and Clayton had spent so many evenings. 6 months after Clayton's death, Willa asked to return to the ranch. Pete, who had been managing the operation for years, had a small cottage on the property, and he moved into the main house to look after her. Her children visited regularly, making sure she was cared for and not lonely. But Willa was not lonely. She had her memories, vivid and warm, of the life she had shared with Clayton. She had her piano, and she played every day, filling the house with music as she had done for decades. She had visits from her children and their families. And she had the knowledge that she had lived a life of meaning and love. One evening in late 1940, a young woman came to the ranch asking to speak with Mrs. Burke. She was maybe 22 or 23, thin and nervous, with a terrible scar that covered half her face, the result of a childhood accident. "I heard about you from my aunt who lives in Gila City," the young woman said. "She told me your story about how you came here with nothing, and a good man married you anyway, and you built a wonderful life together. I am in a similar situation. There is a man who wants to marry me, but I am afraid. I am afraid he is only doing it out of pity, or that he will come to regret it when he realizes how ugly I am." Willa looked at this young woman, seeing herself from nearly 60 years ago, full of fear and doubt, unable to see her own worth. She invited her in and made tea, and they talked for hours. "I will tell you what my husband told me on the day we met," Willa said. "He looked at my scars and said, 'You are beautiful to me,' and he meant it, not because he could not see the scars, but because he saw past them to who I really was. He saw my courage, my strength, my heart, and he loved me for that." "But how did you believe him?" the young woman asked, tears streaming down her scarred cheek. "At first I did not. I thought he was being kind or that he was desperate for a wife. But every day he showed me through his actions that he meant what he said. He treated me with respect and tenderness. He valued my opinions. He made me feel cherished. Eventually, I started to believe him because his actions matched his words. If this man you are considering marrying makes you feel valued and cherished, if he shows you through his actions that he sees your worth, then believe him. Take the chance on love." The young woman left with hope in her eyes, and Willa felt a sense of peace. Perhaps this was part of her legacy too, not just the children and grandchildren, but the story of her life that could give courage to others facing similar struggles. Willa lived to see her 80th birthday in 1943. Her mind was still sharp, though her body had grown frail. All 4 of her children were there for the celebration, along with what seemed like an army of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren, the newest generation of the family she and Clayton had created. Ellen played piano, her skilled fingers bringing forth beautiful melodies. The great-grandchildren sang songs they had learned in school. Everyone ate too much cake, and there was laughter and storytelling late into the evening. As the party wound down, Willa sat in Clayton's old rocking chair, the one he had made with his own hands in the early years of their marriage. She looked around at the faces of the people who existed because she and Clayton had chosen each other, had chosen love, had built a life together. "Tell us the story, Grandma," one of the great-grandchildren asked. "Tell us about when you and Grandpa met." So Willa told the story one more time, about the frightened young woman who stepped off a stagecoach in Gila City with no dowry and a scarred face, and the cowboy who looked at her and said, "You are beautiful to me." She told them about building the ranch together, about raising their children, about the joys and sorrows of a lifetime spent together. "The most important thing," she told the gathered family, "is that you choose love, not just romantic love, though that is important too. But choose love in all things. Choose to see the beauty in people that others might miss. Choose to be kind when it is easier to be cruel. Choose to build something lasting rather than just taking what you can get. That is what your grandfather and I tried to do, and I think we succeeded." 2 months later, Willa Norton Burke passed away peacefully in her sleep, reunited at last with her beloved Clayton. She was buried beside him in the cemetery in Gila City, under a headstone that read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she was beautiful." The ranch passed to Matthew, who continued to run it with the same integrity and hard work his father had shown. The house remained in the family, becoming a gathering place for reunions and celebrations. Ellen's children became musicians, carrying forward their grandmother's love of music. Caroline's grandchildren became teachers and nurses and small business owners, contributing to their communities. James's children went into various fields, but all of them inherited his love of animals and his patience. And in all the families, in all the generations that followed, the story was told and retold, of the woman who arrived with no dowry and a scarred face, and the cowboy who saw beauty where others saw only flaws. It became a family legend, a touchstone, a reminder of what really matters in life. The young woman who had visited Willa that day in 1940 did marry her young man, and they had a good life together. She never forgot the kindness of the elderly woman who had shared her story and given her courage. Years later, when her own granddaughter faced similar doubts and fears, she told her about Willa and Clayton Burke, passing the story forward to another generation that needed to hear it. Because that was the true legacy of Willa and Clayton Burke. Not just the ranch they built or the children they raised, but the story of their love, a story that proved that real beauty comes from courage and kindness, and the choice to see the best in people. It was a story that gave hope to anyone who had ever felt unworthy of love, who had ever believed their scars made them unlovable. It was a story that reminded people that the most valuable things in life cannot be measured in money or physical perfection, but in the strength of the heart and the depth of commitment. In the house on the ranch that Clayton built with his own hands, where Willa had made a home and raised her children and welcomed her grandchildren, the piano still stood. It had been restored and maintained over the years, and Ellen's grandchildren sometimes came to play it, filling the old house with music once again. On the wall hung a photograph, faded now but still clear enough to see the faces. It showed Clayton and Willa on their 50th wedding anniversary, standing together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera with genuine happiness. Willa's scars were visible in the photograph, but so was the light in her eyes, the confidence in her posture, the unmistakable evidence of a woman who was loved and knew it. Below the photograph, in a frame, was a piece of paper with words written in Clayton's distinctive handwriting. It was something he had written for Willa on their 40th anniversary, words that captured the essence of their love. "To my beloved Willa. You arrived with no dowry and a scarred face, but you brought me riches beyond measure. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to wake up grateful every morning. You are, and always have been, beautiful to me. Not despite your scars, but including them, because they are part of you, part of your story, part of what makes you the strongest, most courageous woman I have ever known. I love you today as I loved you the first day I saw you, and I will love you for all the days I have left on this earth. You are my whole world. Always, Clayton." That note remained in the house as a testament to their love, read by generations of their descendants, a reminder of what true love looks like, of what it means to see beyond surface appearances to the real person underneath. The story of Willa and Clayton Burke became part of the history of Gila City itself. When the town celebrated its centennial, their story was included in the official history book, an example of the pioneers who had built the community with hard work, courage, and love. School children learned about them in local history classes. The ranch became a landmark, pointed out to visitors as the place where the Burkes had lived and loved and raised their family. And so the story lived on, passed down through the generations, adapted and retold, but always maintaining its essential truth. A woman who believed she was unworthy of love found a man who saw her true worth. Together, they built a life that mattered, a family that flourished, a legacy that endured. In the end, the greatest testament to their love was not the successful ranch, or the house that still stood, or even the large family they had created. It was the simple fact that their story continued to inspire people decades after they were gone, continued to give courage to those who doubted themselves, continued to remind people that real beauty, lasting beauty, is found in the strength of character and the depth of love. Willa Norton Burke, who had once believed herself to be unmarriageable and worthless, who had stepped off a stagecoach in a dusty Arizona town expecting nothing more than duty and obligation, had lived a life of profound meaning and love. She had been cherished by a good man who saw her true value. She had raised children who became good people. She had built a home filled with music and laughter. She had left behind a legacy that would touch lives for generations. And it all began with a cowboy who looked at a scarred face and saw beauty, who spoke a simple truth that changed 2 lives forever. "You are beautiful to me." That truth, spoken in love and lived out over 50 years of marriage, was the foundation of everything that followed. It was a truth that echoed through the decades, reminding everyone who heard the story that love sees what is truly important, that real beauty comes from within, and that the courage to take a chance on love can transform everything. The sun set over the Arizona desert as it had for countless years, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds and purples. The ranch that Clayton built still stood, occupied now by his great-great-grandchildren, who worked the land and raised cattle, and told their children about the remarkable couple who had started it all. And somewhere in the fading light, if you believed in such things, perhaps 2 spirits sat together on a porch swing, watching the sunset as they had done for so many years, still together, still in love, their story complete and perfect and eternal.